How about it for David Katz, everybody? He's the former federal prosecutor. Now he's defense attorney. David Katz.
Great to be with you.
Yeah. David, the Supreme Court has been active, and most of the activity has related to these moves, aggressive as they are, by the Trump administration. The latest Supreme Court judgment, maybe you can put it into some context for us, seemed to suggest that this freezing of funds, the USAID relief funds that Trump wants and the Trump administration has, enacted. They've enacted the freeze already. They can't do that, according to the court. Or can they? What is the court saying?
Well, actually, I've emphasized the fact that the courts have really held, and people who say, well, the trial courts have held, think, well, these cases will go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it'll be a hard rain that's going to fall on the rule of law. But so far, that's not true, Mark. So far, the Supreme Court has held too. And in this latest decision, it was just an unsigned order, but still 5-4. The Trump administration lost. That can't be lost in the analysis. The Trump administration lost because they didn't have the votes of Chief Justice Roberts, and they didn't have the vote of Amy Coney Barrett. And if they stick with 5 votes that are for the rule of law and that are not going to rubber stamp the Trump administration, we're in good shape. This particular one had to do with spending money. And I think it's going to be very clear that the impoundment law is not going to be monkeyed with. And therefore, the president cannot impound money appropriated by Congress. And
again, explain it. Impoundment means stop.
Even though Congress may not be standing up for itself, the Supreme Court's going to stand up for that because that's in the separation of powers. The money was allocated, and therefore it can't be impounded or held back by the administration. And so a lot of what Trump is doing, so many of these things that Trump is doing, is causing harm, and some of the harm will be irreparable for the employees of the federal government, and it'll be irreparable for the people who need government services like you and me and everyone else. But at least constitutionally, the Supreme Court, I think, will get it right.
So as more and more then is served up to the Supreme Court, you're seeing setbacks for the administration agenda. I'm wondering if that extends to the discharging of so many federal employees.
Well, the probationary employees are probably, as a practical matter, gone. I think any of these federal employees, probationary or not, Mark, if they want to challenge and can do it through their union or otherwise afford to pay for lawyers, I think that a lot of them are going to win in front of these civil service boards. Even with Trump's lackeys in there, I think they're going to still win. I think some of those boards are going to hold because the law is so clear. But the probationary employees have less due process rights. So as a practical matter, they're going to be having trouble getting lawyers that are going to take the case on a contingency. If they don't have unions defending them, there'll be nobody to go to bat for them like a union. And they'll just find other jobs. So many of them are so talented, they don't need this federal job. We need them. Yeah. And I think it was a pity that Biden didn't see this coming, or maybe without having the House on his side, he couldn't do anything about seeing this coming. But certainly the chess move would have been to limit the time that probationary employees were on probation, or to make some of them non-probationary employees sooner. Because what's actually going to happen with these probationary employees is that, from Trump's point of view, they're Biden people. They were selected in the last year, let's say, and they'll get rid of them. They'll go their separate way. And guess what? Those jobs are not going to be canceled. What we're going to actually see is Trump filling them. Trump's going to try to fill them with loyalists. He's going to try to fill them with people he likes. And he figures that the people he's going to get are going to be more to his liking than the probationary employees that Biden got. Think about it. Whenever you think, what sneaky power grabbing thing is Trump going to do? That's what he's going to do. Don't indulge yourself that there's some great mystery. Any way that he and Musk can grab power, punish enemies, get people more to their liking, that's what's going to be done by them if the courts and the public don't stop them.
And there's no real legal stop to the ways in which this unelected, unconfirmed guy, who just happens to be wealthy and obviously has donated a bunch of that wealth to getting this president elected. I understand his alliance with Trump, but there's no way to block the participation of these other 19 to 26-year-olds. There's quite a fleet of them now in Washington who are involved in all of these major government institutions and dismantling them. There's no real legal block to that, David?
Well, as I understand it, Musk is the world's richest man. Now he's about the second or third richest man, only for three reasons. One is because people used to buy Teslas. They're not buying them anymore. He lost over $100 billion in the last month or two just on Tesla stock. The second reason that he's rich is because he's charmed people that we need to go to Mars, and the government spends this huge amount subsidizing SpaceX. My opinion, we don't need to go to Mars. The public should stop spending on this. I don't want to see people on Medicaid not getting health care, people not getting food in America, so that we can have this pipe dream of going to Mars, and that will slash and destroy Musk's fortune. And on top of that, there's Twitter, which people are using less and less and has less and less credibility. So don't bet on Musk staying all that rich all that long. But he figures as long as he battles this, Mark, as long as he intimidates federal employees, that's what this is all about. This is so that they flinch before they investigate something righteous that Musk has done. So they think, oh my God, I could lose my job, no matter how egregious what Musk just did, no matter how many defects there may be in a Tesla, no matter how much this SpaceX is landing in violation of environmental laws, no matter how much X is violating people's rights, they'll flinch at doing something about it. The Europeans don't. The Europeans investigate all those things vigorously. America hasn't so much, and Musk hopes they'll do it a lot less. Trump thinks the same thing. Why is he doing what he's doing on crypto, Mark? He's doing it because he wants to get fat and rich, Trump, on crypto, and not have people say, this emperor of your crypto has no clothes. So he's hoping to do that. Now there's going to be a crypto reserve. It's beyond belief. Like petroleum we need. Crypto, this is nothing but a slash and grab money. Anyway, when you turn to what the courts are doing, what the plaintiffs are doing, since Trump gave the joint address to Congress, where he had Musk stand up and he said he runs DOGE, that's a pretty good piece of evidence. The president saying Musk runs DOGE. So they've all gone back and filed supplemental briefs in these courts where the government has tried, the Trump administration has tried to dodge who's the head of DOGE. And the reality is that there's no dodging it anymore. There's no playing fast and loose with the courts. The courts are getting the fact that he's in charge of DOGE. Why does he want to be officially in charge of DOGE? Because they don't get sued along with DOGE in his personal capacity. Musk doesn't want to be sued any more than he has to. So they've done this elaborate dance, which is falling apart. And so I think that kind of answers your question, that they've gotten away with this for a little while, but they're getting away with it less and less every day. Yes. Are they hurting the public? Yes. Are measles breaking out in this country because of their negligence? Yes. A lot of awful things are happening, but at least constitutionally, legally, the tide has really turned against Trump.
I want you just to double back and put a fine point on the evidence and the DOGE head thing, because there are court cases now, you're saying, in the pipeline, in the courts, talking about the legality of what DOGE is doing, and then holding those people who are associated with DOGE, certainly the guy running DOGE, responsible for that illegality. Can you just explain why it's important to understand why they're trying to carve Musk out of DOGE on one level, and then yet, of course, Trump is acknowledging what we all acknowledge, and is the fact, which is that Musk is running DOGE?
Well, number one, Musk doesn't want to be sued individually. He's a very rich person. There would be punitive damages in a lot of these cases.
And so he'd be sued for wrongful terminations that he produced?
He violated the Privacy Act, allegedly, by taking our records out of Treasury computers, by taking our records out of IRS. There's all kinds of statutory penalties, and there's also punitive damages. And when you get to the issue of punitive damages, where somebody does wrong, where the regulations are completely clear that you're not allowed to go into this or that database, and he had his minions go into those databases, and believe me, they'll turn over in a second. None of these young guys want to go to prison. None of these guys are going to walk the plank for Musk at the end of the day. He can pay for great lawyers, whatever he wants to do. As soon as it's clear that some federal judge gets it and says, Mr. 22-year-old whiz kid, you're on your way to prison. Now, the issue is, if you want to cooperate with the government, who told you to do those things? They'll say, Musk told me on such and such a date, he sent me an email, he did this, he did that. And so Musk would be liable for punitive damages. And then the question is, what would punish somebody like Musk? It could be in the billions of dollars. You got to remember this too. Remember Trump, there was an issue. What would punish Trump with for punitive damages, both when he was sued in New York civilly and when E. Jean Carroll sued him? And the answer both times was hundreds of millions of dollars. That's for Trump. What do you think the punitive damages would be for Musk? So Musk is enjoying this game as long as he thinks it's getting him rich. As soon as he realized that he could be devastated economically, he'd probably get out of this whole thing and figure, you know what? I intimidated federal employees as much as I could. Now some federal judges are going to look at what really happened, and I'm going to be punished appropriately, including with punitive damages. So I think he'll lose his taste for this. But for now, there's this mystery whether he's even involved. And, you can't have people who don't. It's the appointments clause. The courts have been very slow to understand that there's an appointments clause, and anyone who has this kind of major power of running a federal agency has to be approved by Congress. Congress has abdicated. These Republican senators are not saying, hey, wait a second, you're infringing on our prerogatives. Why the Senate Republicans are not doing that, especially the ones who aren't facing the electorate for 4 or 6 years. I get why the ones in 2 years. This Joni Ernst, she's so scared of Trump. This senator's peeing in her pants, thinking about a year and a half what's going to happen to her. Joni Ernst, she says she's the big heroine of women in the service. Oh my goodness, it's so touching. And then Hegseth shows up, a serial alleged abuser of women, and she falls right in line because she's scared of the electorate in Iowa. It's pathetic. But why don't these Republican senators stand up, especially the ones who aren't facing the electorate until 4 or 6 years from now? And I got to say one other thing. You would think they would want to have good relations in Canada. Look at the red states. So many of them border Canada. Canada will hate and revile these Republican senators until death do they part. These Canadians are so furious, and so rightly so. They've done nothing wrong. They're not allowing a bunch of fentanyl to come into the country under any construction. They're our greatest ally. They share this huge border with us, and they're being attacked over and over again. And these Republican senators who share a border with them are doing nothing.
What about this banking thing? You mentioned Canada. This banking thing that Trump is doing. He's doing a dance around American banks that are not allowed to operate in Canada, and therefore he wants to outlaw Canadian banks in America. I mean, I don't know much about and I always look at everything that he says as probably a lie. I mean, you can pretty much count on it not being true. But does the president have this power over American banking policy of that sort?
Well, there were 2 knocks on hanging judges. One is that hanging judges are hanging judges because they just really like to hang people. And the second one is that, no, they're really craven and they want to be known as hanging judges so they can not hang somebody if they're a friend or, they make a payoff. And that's sort of a theory about hanging judges coming from a criminal defense attorney. So why does Trump want to be a hanging president? So he can, stay the execution for somebody who ponies up a lot of money. Wow. So I assume that all of this is to get money out of these Canadian banks, because you take something like TD Bank. TD Bank is an enormous bank. It's all over the East Coast in U.S. cities. And so the idea that he's really going to exclude TD Bank, I mean, at some point, these have to be threats. The economy is already doing badly enough, Mark, but we're going to go into a serious recession. If you have the tariffs and they stay in place, in Mexico, Canada, China at the rate that they are, you have these exclusions of banks. What it does is it decreases competition, prices go up, you have to pay more for these goods. Okay, that's what the consumers do. What's likely going to happen with tariffs is that people will get less and they'll pay more. The consumer in America will lose all around, and some American manufacturers will make a lot of money because their inferior products will be bought because the superior product from abroad now has a tariff that makes it make sense to accept because of the price differential, an inferior product. This happened all over Latin America. I was in Argentina. I had a tennis ball that kept bouncing crazy. Why did the tennis ball bounce crazy in Argentina? because they put so much tariff on, right, Wilson tennis balls that you would buy an Argentinian tennis ball. I'm sure by now they bounce correctly, but when I was there, they bounced crazy. An Argentinian tennis ball.
As Donald Trump, the new president and my Lord and Savior, entered the halls of Congress to give his address, he stopped while he was shaking hands and acknowledging people and thanked a Supreme Court justice. Here is that video. Take a look, David.
Thank you again. Won't forget. So good. Thank you again. Thank you again. Won't forget. So good.
The justice that gave him immunity, John Roberts.
So good.
I wonder if you can just, I mean, in a way, maybe that's not the most damning piece of video. He's just thanking the Supreme Court for backing him up. But on the other hand, that was the decision that has opened the door to, I think, him really feeling as though the law can't touch him.
I think he was right in front of Chief Justice Roberts when he made that comment, I think. And
Right.
Mark, I don't want to get you demonetized, and I don't have that great a singing voice, so I won't sing Unforgettable. But I think that Chief Justice Roberts is going to be known as unforgettable by people who are very skeptical of his decisions. Now, in general, I like Chief Justice Roberts because, thank God, his vote saved Obamacare, and his vote that he just cast along with Barrett made it 5-4. So I'm never giving up. Excuse me. I'm never giving up on Chief Justice Roberts. And, the other thing is that Trump's going to say what he's going to say. You know what I mean? It wasn't like Chief Justice Roberts connived in him saying that. Does Trump think of everything in those personal terms? How does it affect me? Of course. And that's exactly, I think, what he meant. I won't forget. I'll do something for you. Don't worry. Cash Patel won't go after you. My IRS commissioner won't take a look at your tax returns, Chief Justice Roberts. I think that's exactly how he meant it. Totally craven, Trump. But what's Chief Justice Roberts supposed to say when he makes a remark like that? And thank God for hot mics.
Yeah, no, it was a wild moment. It is brought up here. I forget who brought it up. I saw it a couple of times. It was posted once that were Musk to be exposed legally in some way, that Trump has the power of pardon. But let me just say this, and then you can answer. I think what David's talking about, though, is that there's civil liability. You, in other words, there's a penalty. It's not a question. You can't pardon your way out of civil liability. Go ahead, David.
Not at all. Not at all. And you can't pardon your way out of state criminal liability. And, one of these states is going to put on their big boy pants, their big girl pants, and go after some of these offenses. You remember that the DA in New York City famously went after Trump, convicted Trump. Trump stands convicted of 34 state felonies as he occupies the presidency. And so there's no reason why many of Musk's crimes couldn't, allegedly at least, be state crimes. And so there'd be no presidential pardon from a state crime, and there can be no presidential pardon of any sort for a federal judgment. So if he had to pay $5 billion, then Musk would say, I think, wow, this really, intimidated a few employees. I mean, to me, it's so incredible because if you look at all the actions that were taken against him, okay, they weren't worth this. This is why a really smart business person would not have made this calculation. He's not the first really rich person who thought, why don't I put on this kind of clown show where I become co-president? Sure, there weren't a lot of people who wanted to have someone like Musk as their co-president, but I don't think there were many people. You look at the famous, really, really rich people, certainly Rockefeller, some of the Rockefellers were very rich, but you didn't see David Rockefeller when he was head of Chase becoming co-president. Why? It just doesn't make much sense. Get along with both parties. The business person who really has acumen, a businesswoman, decides, get along. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. My God, has Musk put all of his eggs in one basket?
Well, I mean, if you just to extend this general conspiracy notion, which I think, and as I always say, conspiracy theories, just because it's a conspiracy theory doesn't mean that there's not really a conspiracy. I think that the idea somehow that there might be control over the vote, or that there is enough momentum behind this administration, again, not all the country, not even half the country, but enough of the country, that Musk may feel a bit untouchable right now. He's certainly got a tremendous amount of power. I think Trump feels untouchable, and I don't know what the situation is going to be in 2 years with the midterms or beyond. But I think these guys have plans that go well beyond what's happening now. And in the short term, all I'd say is that Musk is enriching himself so substantially. I mean, he's jacked that government contract from Verizon. He's increased the amount of money that existing government contracts are giving him. He's got that ridiculous Mars program. The only thing I'll say about the Mars program is, on the back of what you said about it, is it's ridiculous. It's really like saying, I'm going to build a ladder to Mars, and I want you to give me government contracts to help build this ladder. It's a special high-tech ladder. We call it a ladder, but it's actually something, there's a lot of complex stuff here you probably wouldn't understand. But the point is, the goal is to get to Mars on this ladder, because there's the same chance, if I were to build a ladder to Mars, of getting to Mars, that there is of sending a manned mission to Mars. The radiation associated with that, the inhabitability of Mars is extraordinary. It is an absurd notion that you would populate Mars or set up some kind of situation in Mars where you could actually live. And what it is hundreds of billions of dollars that are just dumped on this rich guy. And now he's just able to siphon off those tax dollars and increase that amount. So that's what's happening with this Mars crap. And yet, because we were all into sci-fi and we just love the idea of going to Mars, and we've loved it for so many decades, that when it's called out before Congress in a Trumpian speech, we all see everybody applauds and go, yeah, that's right, we're going to go to Mars. This is so exciting. These guys are really dreamers.
Well, the Republicans there, the Congress and the Senate, they applauded for everything. I mean, it was like a MAGA rally.
Yeah.
And some of the things really made no sense. His 5-minute riff on Social Security was terrible. His speechwriters, from his own point of view, his own speechwriters should have been fired. If anyone didn't persuade, I mean, there's 150-year-old people, and then he names them like there's real people. It's a way that they did the computer so that they would sort of not be sent checks. There's no billions of dollars of Social Security checks, Mark, that are being sent out. But
of course
what is the narrative there? The narrative there is to blast Social Security. If you say people are getting Social Security and they're old and they need the money, people are going to go, yeah. So you've got to say something if you're getting ready to cut back Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So what you say is it's all full of thieves. There's all this thievery going on. There's all kinds of incompetence going on. And it's just utterly untrue. But people should beware, Mark, that that's where we're going next. And when he starts to go there, people are even getting a hint. As it is now, Republican Congress members can't hold town halls because people show up, Republicans, people who voted for Trump, and they say he promised he wasn't going to mess around with my Social Security, my Medicare, and my Medicaid. And now it looks like he is. What, to line Musk's pocket for this insanity to go to Mars, all of this government spending on that and not on my Social Security, which, by the way, I paid into, not on my Medicare and my Medicaid that I need. And then it's all going to fall apart. People say, when is the Trump bubble going to burst? That's when the Trump bubble is going to burst. He didn't go there during the first term, but now he just has that. Oh my God, is it hubris? This is the Greek god falls, right? This is the Greek god falls because of hubris. Now he thinks he can get away with anything, no guardrails. And you could watch it day after day. He gets less popular in the polls. Republicans are going to start to run away from him, especially members of Congress, because that is a third rail. You touch Medicare and Social Security, that's a third rail. And he's got a lot of older voters who receive both Medicare and Social Security. They'll abandon him in droves. And of course, they want to close these offices, and they're going to stop answering the phone. So you don't get, some poor old person doesn't get their Social Security check. They want to go to their office. They're talking about closing these federal offices around the country, so you can't go there. Then you pick up the phone, and there's no one to answer the phone. So what do? Starve? You call up your relatives and say, please, can you bail me out? If you have a relative who will bail you out, you just lost that person's vote. You lost the vote of everyone in their family. They're not going to vote over whether the Democrats supposedly are okay with people who were born male competing in female sports. That's going to be way down the list. And the minute they miss a Social Security check and can't get it, or miss Medicare, not allowed to visit, his popularity will tank. And apparently he doesn't care. He's figured he'll make himself as rich as he can. He doesn't have another term. Everyone thinks, oh, somehow he'll get a constitutional amendment. No, he won't. He figures this is it. This is the last chance to steal. 3.5
Well,
years.
again, I don't, the election thing is a whole different question as to how long he's in power. But I would say that the Social Security thing has already happened. What you're talking about, what David Katz is speaking of, has already happened. He's made cuts to Social Security, which may be, along with the IRS, one of, if not the most efficient government agency in Washington, the Social Security Administration. They have made cuts that will, according to Social Security directors and those who are at the top levels of the Social Security Administration, they will affect people's ability to get checks on time and to be provided service. And they are closing offices nationwide. They're canceling leases nationwide at Social Security. So the reason that, as David Katz noted, Donald Trump spent so much time on Social Security, 5 minutes he spent with those lie after lie about people getting checks and they're 130 years old, 300 years old, 200 years. Why would he pursue that when we know it's been so widely debunked? I've debunked it here day after day after day. The reason is what David Katz is saying. He is targeting the privatization of Social Security. We, again, as you say, may not see it because there'll be so much pushback, but already they have diminished Social Security's ability to serve the public, David Katz. It's already happened because of cuts at the agency.
The other thing, too, is that because of fear of the electorate, I mean, Trump, is doing a lot of reckless things, but I think he's trying to not have his approval rating drop to 30 or 35%, because if you get there, you really can't rule. I don't care. You have the Congress, you have the Senate. If you're at 30% in the polls, you can't rule. Everyone's making fun of you. Everybody's emboldened to treat you like a clown, like an idiot. He doesn't want to get to 30%. So what he'll try to do, I think, is keep the Social Security checks going out to the old people. It's the younger and middle-aged people who are listening to your show who should really be worried, because you're paying in and he's taking no provisions to make sure that there's going to be money around for that. And, he really does spend money like a drunken sailor. That's why these probationary employees, they're not even there. The job's not going to get cut. Like I said, he's going to go find people that he likes better and hire all those people back. He's going to hire a whole bunch of people back. He hopes it's going to be like the spoils system. That's what we had before the civil service. With the winner go the spoils. And you hired a whole bunch of people, smart, stupid. Who cares if they were stupid, right? They were on your side and they got hired for federal jobs. And so that's what I think Trump is going to do. He's going to spend loads and loads of money while he's cutting all these agencies back, like USAID, AIDS. He is spending more money on the Pentagon. The Pentagon apparently is completely immune from this cross-cutting thing. He's just spend. This is all Trump does. And the Republicans used to be the old guys who said, yeah, you Democrats, great idea, we can't afford it. They used to be great idea, we can't afford it. Now, of course, they think every Democratic idea is a terrible idea, and then they spend more money than the Democrats do in their wildest spending spree. So this is unsustainable, Mark. Let me say one thing about the IRS.
Let me just make a fine point, then I'll get to the IRS, and that is what David's saying. I mean, across the Potomac, you have the gold medalists, the perennial gold medalists of waste, fraud, and abuse. They are the Pentagon. There is no institution or agency in Washington that is even a close second place. And yet they're going to give them more money while they axe these efficient, terrific institutions that really aren't part of this fraud, waste, and abuse that they're claiming they're going after. Now, please talk about the IRS.
So, Mark, you have such wonderful guests on and diverse. I don't know if you have anyone this diverse that they stand up for the IRS. I am going to do the stand up for the IRS as a federal criminal defense attorney who's often fighting with the IRS because I represent clients who are under, criminal audit, criminal investigation. But, I have my disagreements with them, but they're hardworking. They're conscientious. They have all of these rules. The idea that they're sort of just like out there, they document everything they do. They keep careful ledgers. They have supervisors. They have all kinds of guardrails to make sure the IRS is run properly. And every one of them that's fired was bringing in 12 or 15 times their salary, Mark. So if you are trying to actually save money, There's two, and you know, he's going to balance the budget. Trump says he's going to balance the budget. You just shake your head when the Republicans get up there. Nothing about what he's doing is going to get him anywhere near balancing the budget. Clinton, who they don't like, of course, balanced the budget. But the first thing two things that you would do, you would increase the IRS so they could collect more money, including from a bunch of huge tax cheats, and like very, very rich people and big corporations. I usually represent small business people, but you know the ones that I'm talking about, the huge corporations that pay almost nothing. And you need an army of IRS agents to figure out what their accounting tricks are and to get the money back for the people. And the second thing you do is you'd have lots and lots of inspectors general. And this will get through to the general public, even the Republican voters, that you don't cut fraud, waste, and abuse by getting rid of the people who cut fraud, waste, and abuse, who are the inspectors general who Trump has axed across the board.
Yeah. I mean, they'll call them corrupt or they'll call them whatever, but that's exactly
There's no
right.
evidence.
Of course not. But I mean, there's no evidence for, you know, a lot of what they say. And it is true that, you know, you don't get rid of the cop on the beat if you're really serious about crime. And on the IRS, I mean, that's where all your revenue is coming from, as you say, David. I mean, if you're serious about this budget, if you're really serious at all about budget, that's where your revenue comes from. And as we've said over and over, I mean, if you simply inched up a little bit of the number of people, you know, you hire more people for the white collar criminals. That's the division where there is a ton of money. And of course, that was for the first division to be cut under the first Trump administration, and now under this administration as well. And that was a bone thrown to his rich billionaire buddies. I wanted to ask you about something that has nothing to do with what we've been speaking of so far, but the Supreme Court agreed with you can characterize San Francisco as liberal, I think, you know, fairly. But just this week, their federal regulators, they said in their decision from the Supreme Court, had overstepped their authority by trying to impose vague limits, they said, on how much raw sewage in San Francisco can get pumped into the Pacific Ocean. So this is something that's going on in San Francisco. And Alito, again, conservative justice, wrote in the opinion, it was a 5-4 majority, that the EPA was overstepping its boundaries by policing water quality standards, and that San Francisco can dump this raw sewage into the Pacific Ocean. I saw it as a real sad moment, because all this stuff that has to do with the EPA just saddens me. I mean, they're really just taking the teeth out of all the rulings. But I wonder if you can just speak to this judgment.
Well, you know, I agree with the work that the EPA does. I mean, sometimes I'm sure that there are excesses. There are things that, you know, people can say they go too far. There's certainly too much regulation. You know, an intelligent way of cutting regulations would be so wonderful. But it seems like the Republicans often just want to slash it, even when we need it so bad. And it seems like the Democrats, sometimes they get kind of this inertia where they can't cut regulations. So I tend to be kind of in the middle of that. But no, it's very sad with the EPA. And that's what they're going to do, Mark. They're going to cut back. And I've said this before, that I think what the Supreme Court ultimately is going to do is to say that the president can remove the heads of these groups, like the EPA, like the SEC, like the FTC, even if there's a fixed term. I think they are going to say, and I don't necessarily agree with them, but I think they're going to say that with the separation of powers, Congress can set up these agencies, it can give them missions, it can fund them, but in terms of who actually leads them, whether they set a term or not, that is a presidential prerogative to remove that person. One of the really interesting cases, Mark, which just came down, if I can spend a minute on it, this is this fellow, Dellinger. Dellinger is the head of this Office of Special Counsel, which is not Jack Smith. It's not Robert Mueller. It's a whistleblower group set up by Carter, approved by Congress, approved ever since then by Congress. And this person is supposed to make sure that if you're a federal whistleblower, you don't get fired on some pretext. To figure out whether you're really a whistleblower, and if you are really a whistleblower, make sure that you're not punished. Also, he manages something called the Merit Protections Board. There was that question went up to the U.S. Supreme Court on an emergency basis. And I know for people who aren't lawyers, but trial courts decide something. If you really think that what the trial court's done is wrong, you can run to the appellate courts. But usually the appellate courts say, it's not that much of an emergency. Come back from a clearer ruling or a later ruling. In this instance, the district judge kept him in the job, even though Trump purported to fire him without cause, just because he didn't like him. He wasn't a guy that he liked. Trump wanted to get rid of him, term or no term. This case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they said it's not a true emergency. It went back to the trial court, and the trial court said, on a permanent basis, I'm going to leave you in that office, not just temporarily. I'm going to leave you, Dellinger, in that office. You're the head of an independent agency, and the president cannot remove you. After she ruled that, I think it was a she, it went up to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals because it was going back up. It went up to the U.S. Supreme Court as an emergency, and then it went back up as a preliminary injunction. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against him and said, no, the district court would have permanently kept you in your job until further ruling. We do not agree with that. We're ousting you. And then it was teed up to go to the Supreme Court again. He, I think, wisely resigned. I think he decided that he did not want that to be the trial, to be the case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it maybe made terrible precedent for 100 years. He might have made good precedent, but I think he said, you know what, there's other jobs I can do, there's other things I can do, and he resigned. And I think that was not, some people may look at that as, kind of caving in, but I think he played out the string as long as he could. While he was still in office, kept by the judge, he did some wonderful things, like get this merit selection board looking into thousands of cases of people who got dismissed by Trump who shouldn't have been. And then he's going to go, that's what's amazing. All these people who supposedly corrupt, or they're bubs, or they waste time, they go and get jobs making 5 times as much because they're so competent, they're so good, especially the ones who are lawyers, always turn around and make quite a bit more money. They're actually sacrificing. People out there can say what they want to say. They are sacrificing by having those government jobs. You take Ali Mayorkas, my old friend, who was impeached. They made up so much stuff about Ali Mayorkas. He made so much more money before he went to the government. He's going to make so much money after he leaves the government. The U.S. attorney out here was making a couple of $1 million a year as a tremendous trial lawyer when he went to be the U.S. attorney here in Los Angeles. So it's just,
well, let me ask you about Mayorkas. I don't mean to put, this is fascinating to me.
Wants to say, right?
Yeah, this is fascinating to me. Let me just ask you about Mayorkas because I've got you here, and
Okay.
it's intriguing to me. I mean, he did give Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal, didn't he? I mean, just plain and simple.
No, he's not the one. No,
who was it? Who was it?
That was a different cabinet member. No, Mayorkas didn't give Epstein any kind of sweetheart deal. Mayorkas was the U.S. attorney in Los Angeles. Then he was the deputy Homeland Security under Obama, and then he was the head of Homeland Security.
Okay.
People will remember as they got on a flight because he was head of. He had his picture. He was saying he had a little video there at every airport where he said, "Hi, I'm Alejandro Mayorkas, the head of Department of Homeland Security." But it was another guy. It was not Mayorkas.
It was a guy from Florida. Somebody can help me with that. I don't, in the chat, somebody knows. But,
he was a Trumpy. He was a Trumpy official from the first time around who had to resign. He'd been the U.S. attorney down in the Southern District of Florida,
right,
who gave a sweetheart deal to Epstein during one of the.
Thank you. That's it. I thought it was Mayorkas. The Epstein case docs announced with. I knew they'd be the minute they made a big deal out of it. I knew it was going to be a nothing because that's what they do. They've redacted it. There was no new information, what wasn't already into the public sphere. Give me a moment on the Epstein case docs and also MLK and JFK. I think they all fall in the same category. It's all show and no go.
Well, I think RFK Jr. Likes this because somehow it makes his uncle even more of a martyr. His uncle's a martyr and a great man in my book, and I don't need RFK Jr. to go muck around. He ought to deal with measles. If he wants to do something useful, he ought to deal with this measles outbreak and everything else. When they cut that money back for U.S. AIDS, all that money is going to be restored. But of course, they made so much havoc, so much chaos before it gets restored. The people at USAIDs, I think, are going to come out okay. It's us who aren't going to come out okay. It's right. Our money that bought those goods that Trump allowed to rot. He allowed those warlords to steal it. That was on us. But the people who worked at USAIDs, they're going to get their back pay. They're probably going to get their back pay with something else. This was completely ineffective, what he was trying to do there. But, I was on that show on Fox. And if you'd like to, I'll take 30 seconds to talk about Fox. My old friend Adam Schiff said, I think he was on Bill Maher, but he said it other places too a couple of years ago. He said, if Fox invites you, go on, tell your side of the story. Let them ask their questions. Let them tell their side of the story, but tell your side of the story. You know, people who watch Fox are not unreachable. I know loads of people like that. I have relatives like that. I mean, you know, we're not as polarized. Fox tries to polarize us, but the country's not that polarized. So I did a show about 2 hours before the joint address, and I hope you were going to play that.
Yeah, that's this is what he's playing right now, Matt, is, we can listen to a little bit if you
Out very
want.
poorly, and today is the day that the tariffs kick in for Mexico and Canada. Both of them are putting retaliatory tariffs, and prices are going to zoom up, which is not, it seems, what people voted for. And of course, the Democrats will point out that prices are going to zoom because of the tariffs and because of the other policies that are being pursued by Trump, who said he would cut prices.
Gotcha. Is this event tonight? Do we see presidents often do this early in their during their presidency?
Well, it comes around, you know, the State of the Union. And of course, there's not much of a State of the Union of a year's duration, which is normally what you have.
Okay.
But here he's talking about the 6 or 7 weeks that he's been here. And certainly there's been a lot of hyperactivity. I think there'll also be a lot of criticism about Musk. They'll call him the co-president. They'll say it really should have been him up there speaking. He's the one who's cut back these government agencies, and he's the one who's gotten into all of these computers. You know, the courts have ruled in over 95% of the cases against Trump. And these are Democratic, but also Republican appointed judges. So there's been an awful lot of turmoil, and I think Trump's popularity is going down. He'll try to boost it. And of course, the Republicans in the chamber will be applauding wildly. But, you know, the fact that it'll look like a MAGA rally doesn't mean it's popular with anybody but the intense MAGA crowd. He doesn't seem to have reached across the aisle and done anything that's popular nationwide, that's popular with the other party. He's just hunkering down with his MAGA base.
All right, that's good stuff. That's our David Katz on
Higher
WTTG in Washington. That was my station growing up. I grew up in Washington, D.C. Katz was there with those anchors. Anchors are very, like, laid back. Guy, like, scratching his beard while he's talking to you. He's kind of hanging out. Just tell us, David, what do you think's going to happen tonight? It's like a very... I always liked my anchors in Washington. There was an anchor when I was growing up named Jim Vance.
Yes,
he used to wear the colors, the African colors, on the air. I loved it. I thought it was the coolest thing. He'd wear this like a beanie. This is an anchor doing this. This is during the Civil Rights Movement, so it didn't seem weird at all. And he was like the coolest, hippest. I think he had a coke problem later in life and stuff. And then he became like the grand old man. You know what I mean? And Jim Vance, he was on WRC, the NBC station, but WTTG, they were Channel 5, and they still are. I really loved them. And now they're Fox O&O.
Mark, you know, the local Fox people there have been great. They have me on quite a bit, and they have a really nice vibe. And they, you know, they hear my side of the story. You cut before she said to me, well, didn't people vote for this? I mean, you know, she's sort of standing up for, you know, their what side of the story. But when she says, didn't people vote for that? Then I had a chance to come back and say, no, they really didn't. Maybe they voted for tailoring the government, but who voted for chaos, firing all these people, firing every probationary employee, whether they were terrific or not? Who voted for any of that? So, you know, we had a chance to have a nice interchange. And the other thing is, of course, you couldn't have a city where these cuts are less popular than D.C. I mean, they have a DC audience, and, you know, Virginia and Maryland, and they've been devastated. I mean, the economic harm to that area has been so profound with all these cuts.
The real estate market in DC is in a free fall right now because of this. It's only
20% of the employees are in DC, but still that's a lot of people. You know, DC, half the people work for the government. I don't think that's unfair to say in the DC metropolitan area, it's about half the people. 80% are outside of Washington, D.C., and they're all the ones that we're talking about right now, too. The Forest Service, you can't go to the national parks. They're going to close national parks this summer. Talk about make America great again. What's something great about this country that pops into your mind? Yosemite, Yellowstone, these national parks all over the country that are going to be closed to people, to families that want to go there this summer. And then it just goes on and on, and all the medical things that are being cut. 1/10 or more than that at the VA. Who voted to cut the VA? They need more care, the vets. I thought Trump was supposed to be for the vets. They're cutting the VA tremendously.
Yeah, and they can only demonize so many agencies at one time. You know, they're trying to demonize Social Security by making up that stuff about how 130-year-olds and 300-year-olds are getting checks. It's total, BS. They can talk about inefficiencies, but there certainly aren't these inefficiencies at all of these agencies, and you're not addressing them when you go in with a meat cleaver and cut these agencies up. It's a brutal period right now in Washington. It's interesting that you were on Washington television. It was Alexander Acosta who was the guy who was with the Epstein judgment, and the Justice Department actually said that Acosta used a poor judgment, is what they said, in giving Epstein a plea deal out of Florida. That was, and then Acosta went on to be part of the first Trump administration. That was who I was thinking of. I have to let David Katz go, and not in the way that government employees are being let go, but just in the way that we have to say goodbye. Trump has admitted his policies will cause, quote, a little hurt or something to that effect, says John Watson. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's going to cover it, the kind of hurt that we're looking at. It seems more than just a little.
By the way, let me say hello to Kim. I watch the show from time to time, and Kim, I enjoyed your comments the other day. So how you doing there?
I don't remember what I said, but I will say what Trump is.
I think that you were mortified by what's happening with the government, just shocked that this could happen. How could there be this rapid change? And it's absolutely appalling. And you hope that the Congress would do something, and the Democrats don't have any power. And like I said, the Republican senators, even when it involves their neighboring country of Canada, they just are completely. Used to have the ding, pusillanimous.
Pusillanimous. There you go. The Mark Thompson show, Ren is asking, can you ask David about the idea that the president is an agent of our enemy? Was that for David Katz or David K. Johnston, I wonder? I mean, I don't know about whether David really, you have a view. Of course, now in your new established role as a political strategist and commentator, maybe you want to, that's a, here's
all the one thing. All I would say was this: Trump is not enforcing the Foreign Registration Act, the FARA. So if somebody is an agent for a foreign government, there used to be very stringent requirements that they reported, and now he's cutting that back. How is it the national interest to cut back the required reporting of someone who's a foreign agent? Of course, what they do is they write an editorial and they say it's in the government's best interest. It's in the people of America's best interest. And the reality is they've been paid $100,000 by the Turkish government to write that editorial. And you have a right to know that. Then you can say, okay, this guy took $100,000 from Turkey. He thinks we should do something that really helps Turkey. He's got some good arguments, and I can accept them or not, but you ought to have a right to know who's a foreign agent, who's a lobbyist. He's cut back on that. So, but don't get me started on what's happening with Ukraine. I'm an old school. I'm with Reagan on this one. I'm not with Trump on this one at all.
I mean, I don't know who is with Trump. It's I understand his paid toadies are with him, but otherwise I just don't get this. And I understand also how they've sold this notion that we're, spending all this money and we've got to keep the money here. But it's to see Europe on the brink of an expansion of this theater of war is scary. And to hear so many world leaders talking in the way they are, I think what you have in this administration is an inability, certainly an inability on the part of Trump's part. I think it's more than disregard. I think it's an inability to understand the fragility of the entire situation in Europe and how America's presence has bolstered the kind of peace that we've had for all these decades in Europe, I'm talking about. So this is an insanely destabilizing thing that we're seeing in Washington, and it's really, really scary. Great to be with you, David, and I look forward to next week. And you can find David across all these media outlets. You're very much in demand, sir. So
I'm on in New York City. You talk about the stations you grew up with. I'm on with the stations in New York City that I grew up watching when I was a kid. Although the truth be told, I didn't watch that much TV. I read books. Remember that?
Oh yeah, that was great.
My dad said, turn off the idiot box.
Yeah, and now you have a Netflix series. No more books.
I resist that. I love reading. I'm one of those guys. My dad said, turn off the idiot box, read a book.
Well, that's why you're a smarty. I'll talk to you soon, David Katz, everybody. Bye, David. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.